So you think about what's going on in our world today, and there are a lot of reasons why mental health issues in our society are like one of the hot topics. People are talking about this. I read about articles about this constantly, about people dealing with anxiety and people dealing with depression. It doesn't take long to see why. I mean, I made a short list today of things going on in our world, like 2 wars. And that makes people really, really scared. And the environment and environmental issues. I mean, Wisconsin is going to hit 70 degrees this week or close to it in February. We are now the new Florida. So we are so it's like, come north to Florida, Wisconsin. So anyway, I don't know, but I'm not complaining. I am not complaining, right? So it's like, what's going on with our environment and our economy? How many people have that figured out? What's going to be taking place in the next year? You want to guess? I don't want to. I have no idea what's happening in the economy and inflation and politics. Politics, and what's going to happen this year, and then illnesses and diseases and all these things. And that's just the big stuff in the world, and some of it, right? And then you think about what's going on in your life, and some of you are dealing with some big stuff today. Some of you have conflict in relationships that are really, really important to you, and it's not going well. Some of you have people in your life that are important to you, and you haven't talked to them in a long time because the relationship has fallen apart. Financial struggles. My goodness, what an incredible issue in America right now. So many people, their budgets don't work. They can't make their bills each month, or they just barely are limping by financially. And then there's health issues, and some of you have big work issues because you work with jerks. They're just not nice people, or your boss is a jerk, or the environment and the culture of the place where you work is really, really toxic. So, I mean, you got all these things going on at work that you have to deal with. And how many of you have unreasonable people in your life? People that don't want to talk, they just want to create drama. You have any drama creators in your life? And you've got to deal with this. And some of you are really scared about your personal future. It's like, what does my future hold? Relationally, career-wise? And so for many, many Americans today, if I had to put all of their concern into like 1 or 2 images, it might look like this, right? It might look like this is what they feel like going through life today. Or maybe this one reflects yours a little bit more. Or I have no idea what this guy was doing, but maybe that's how you feel, right? So it's like, I got no idea. It just doesn't seem to be going very well. Either way, you're not having fun, right? It doesn't seem very fun. And so my question to you, with all of this going on in our world and in our personal lives, is this. Do you actually believe that it is possible for you, in a world like this, to have inner peace? To have real peace, a calm mind and a calm heart, no matter what you're living through? Do you believe in that? Some of you may theoretically believe it's true, so that my next question is that your day-to-day experience? Do you live with very, very low levels of worry and barely ever feeling anxious? Is that how you live? Is that your experience? For many people, even followers of Jesus, the answer honestly would be, nope, not my experience. I have a lot of things I worry about, I know that. I have a lot of things I feel anxious about, and I know that. And that's why since Christmas Eve, we have been giving away this book. And it's the autobiography of George Mueller. So I know that every week there are people that are new, either watching online or here in the room, and so you're like, well, who's this guy? So he is one of my heroes of the faith. George Mueller lived in England in the 1800s. Many of you have heard me talk about it. You could probably tell this story by now. So he was a pastor in England at a time when governments didn't run orphanages. So if your mom and dad died and you were a child, you were just thrown out on the streets. And you froze to death on the streets, or you starved to death on the streets, or you were taken into workhouses where you worked 7 days a week. Or you were abused by evil people, or you were put in prison. Children in prison, that was the reality in his world in the 1800s. So being a strong Christian, he's like, we can't live in a world like this where we allow this to happen, because God commands Christians to care for widows and orphans. And so he and his wife started taking in children in this house on Wilson Street in the 1800s. The very first house they started filling up with orphans. And when they filled this full, about 25 to 30 orphans, they got another house on this street, on Wilson Street, and so they would get They eventually had 4 houses on this street, and they were full of orphans, and all the people were caring for the orphans. They had to have teachers, and they had to have people who would just take care of the orphans during the day and night. They had a lot of infants, so they had somebody who was just caring for the infants all the time. And then he quickly eventually outgrew these houses, and so he started building these massive orphanages in Bristol, England. The buildings still stand. This is the second one he built, not even the first one. This is the third one. Look at the size of that building. His orphanages could house up to 450 orphans. When he was done building all 5 of the buildings, they could house over 1,700 orphans at a time. And in his lifetime, he cared for 10,000 orphans. And you think about all the expenses of caring for 10,000 children, like teachers that he had to hire and school supplies that he had to buy. You think it's expensive in the fall when your kids go back to school? What if you had 10,000 kids and you had to buy everything for them and pay the teachers and pay for all the things that these kids were going to have to do? I mean, all the clothing, all the food, every single day, the health care. And he educated them to such a high level that when they were done graduating from his program, they went off and got great jobs. Because he didn't want them just to be poor. He wanted to really set them up for success in life. Now, not ditch digging. That wasn't the job. That was just a picture of the orphans. But all the expenses associated with it, and here's the unique thing about him and why we've been telling his story for 5 weeks. It's the end of our series today. The reason I'm telling you this story is because what Mueller did is he would not talk to people about what he needed. He would only talk to God. He would say, God, I need this much to pay the rent by tomorrow. And I need this much just to buy breakfast by tomorrow. And he brought his needs to God every single day, and God provided for him constantly. And that's what this book is all about. It's his diary of all the ways in which God met his needs day by day by day. And the needs just got massive. By the time he built his first orphanage, the needs were $50,000 a month. And then they only went up from there. And he just kept trusting God, and God kept coming through. And the interesting thing, and why I love his story so much, I started reading this book devotionally about 5-6 months ago. I get up earlier than I need to in the morning so that I can pray and read my Bible before work. And because it's his diary, it's short little sections, I just started reading a little section every day. And I started underlining and dog-earing and making notes all through this thing. And eventually I thought, you know what, we got to talk about this, because where do you see examples like this? And one of the themes that just overwhelmed me was this theme of peace. Listen to what he said. In one of his journal entries early on, he said, "No money came in the last 2 days. And the matter has now become a solemn crisis." He had about 80 orphans at this time. So he called the brothers and sisters together for prayer, the people that worked in the orphanage, because they obviously knew. And he said, "Despite this trial of faith, I still believe God will help us." And he said, "In the midst of this great trial, the Lord mercifully keeps me in great peace." Now, I want to ask you, if you had 80 children to provide for, and you had no money to pay the rent, no money to buy them food for tomorrow, and I was asking you to describe the emotions that you were feeling in that moment, how many would you say, peaceful? Oh, I'm just so peaceful. We have a fraction of his problems, and we have way more anxiety and way more fear. And he lived with this tremendous ongoing peace despite circumstances that honestly were way worse than anything I've ever lived through. So my question is, if you could have it, would you like to be able to turn down the fear dial in your life and not be so afraid? And would you like to be able to turn down the anxiety in your life and not feel anxiety? Instead, have that replaced with peace and joy and hope? We're finishing a series today called Unshakable Faith. and we're going to finish by talking about how can I have peace in anxious times when my circumstances don't seem to indicate that I could. So in your program are these notes. Would you all grab your notes, open up your program, take your notes out? If you're watching online on YouTube, go to our website at pennielchurchlife.com. You can download the notes for this series and for this message today as well. And I'm going to have you start with something a little bit different. Flip your notes over on the back. We're going to start with the back because this is the end of a series, 5 weeks long. So it's been all about how to have unshakable faith, and I've covered a lot, and they're sequential. And so I want to just kind of remind you of what we've covered so far. Some of you have heard these, so it's just a reminder to you. You have got to start small. You've got to start with something. If it's your goal, listen, if you want to experience God, if you don't want God just to be a word that you say once in a while, but you want to know him, then you have got to trust him with something. Something. Because if you don't step out in faith, the Bible says it's impossible to please God without faith. You will never encounter him without faith. The woman that we started this service with today, her faith healed her, Jesus said. Faith is what it's about. You got to trust him with something. So that we've been saying, You've got to think about where do you have needs in your life? What needs do you have in your life today? What problems can't you solve? Where are you hurting? What are you worried about? And maybe what's bothering you in this world make you angry? And here's what you do. You sum it up with this. God, I choose to start trusting you with, and that's in bold on the back of your notes. And I've been asking you every week to put one thing in that spot, one thing next to that, where you say, God, I'm going to trust you with what? What are you trusting with? Because if you don't ever start trusting him with something, you'll never encounter him. You'll never experience him. So you've got to trust him with something, and I've got more than one thing I got in there where I'm trusting him. And then the second thing we said is, next what will happen is, so you're going to go like this. Okay, God, here it is. I give this to you. I'm going to start trusting you with this. And the next thing that happened is this. Your faith is now going to start being tested. So you start trusting him, and your faith's going to get tested. And some of you are like, well, that doesn't seem very nice. Why is he testing my faith? Well, because we've been explaining that your faith is like a muscle. How many of you have tremendous muscles because you sit on the couch, watch a lot of TV, and eat Doritos, right? Don't we all wish? Oh, something's growing when I do that, but it's not my muscles, right? So the only way to build muscle, right, is put it under strain. That's it. You've got to test it and work it, and then it'll grow. And your faith is like a muscle. If you want it to grow, you've got to put it under test. And so God says in the Bible repeatedly, your faith is going to be tested, and it's not a bad thing, it's a good thing. The test will be things like you have more needs. You have unexpected delays, demands, new difficulties. The dollars go up, not down. There's silence when you pray to God, and you don't sense anything from him. That's a test. Or things get worse. So you're like, okay, God, I'm going to start trusting you with my financial needs. And what happens? You're driving home from church and your car breaks down. Now, that's a test. How you handle that determines whether you experience God or miss out on God. I've done it right. I've done it wrong. We all have. But we want to pass the test because tests are here to make us reveal what's inside of us, refine our faith, and make it grow. And then we said this, the way you prove your faith, you demonstrate your faith by praying without ceasing. So here's the image I want you to have in your mind, okay? All of us have needs. We go like this to God. God, here are my needs. I am trusting you with this and this and this and this in my life. And here is God. He is infinite. He never runs out of resources. His power never gets worn out. And he cares about you. And the way we connect our needs to this infinite God is through prayer. I love how Mueller says it in the book. Prayer is the visible expression of my faith. So if you're saying, oh yeah, God, I'm trusting you with this, and you're saying, yep, I'm trusting God in this area of my life because I really need him, then I'm going to say, great, tell me how much time you spent yesterday praying about it. And, oh, well, I was busy yesterday. Well, okay, how about the day before? How much time did you, well, I didn't really spend any time that day either. Okay, well, how about the, well, at some point, it's very clear then you don't trust him because prayer is the visible expression that you trust him. So if you trust him with this need, you're going to be praying about it all the time. And it's prayer that's this vertical connection between my needs and this real and powerful God. And we start trusting in God alone, and prayer is the proof of that. We talked about making sure we're telling ourselves the right stories by using God's promises. We'll get into that a little bit more later. And then last week we covered everybody's favorite. What do you do when God makes you wait? You're praying about something and you're waiting and waiting and waiting. And we told you that faith is built in the waiting room, and I challenged you to pray 3 things last week. Say, God, and these are on the back of your notes. God, thank you, there's a purpose in my waiting. Thank you that you're working right now to help me, and I can't wait to see how you will bless me. Mueller said we should not only pray for God's blessing, we should expect it. Okay, so that's it. That's what we've covered so far. You're all caught up. So, now, one last thing to talk about today. Now we start, and we keep praying, we keep going with all this until I experience his peace in my life, because that's what he wants me to have. I keep going and keep praying until I experience his peace in my life. So let me show you what this means. One of my favorite verses about peace is right here. It's on your notes. It's up here on the screen. Look at this. Paul wrote to the Philippian Christians. He says, don't worry about anything. Instead, pray about everything. Tell God what you need and thank him for all he's done. So there's 4 commands in that, and we're going to come back to this verse in just a minute. But then look what he says happens next, okay? He says, then, if you do that first part, here's what the second part will be. Then you will experience God's peace. And look at this. Does he want you to know about his peace? Does he want you to be able to put true or false down about, does God offer peace? What does he want for you? He wants you to experience it. Are you experiencing God's peace in your life today with the problems that you're dealing with? Do you feel at peace? Do you have a calm mind and a calm heart today with the things that are troubling for you? Because that's what he wants, okay? So then you will experience it, which exceeds anything we can understand. And his peace then guards our hearts and our minds as we live in Christ Jesus. So not only does he want us to experience it, it's so amazing that literally if you've never experienced it, we can't tell you what it's like because you have to experience it to know what it's like. It's so great, it's indescribable. Because here's the thing, here's the reality of it. So here's us and our needs and our anxieties and our fears, and we start trusting God. Okay, God. And when you start doing this, you're really tentative. It's like, oh, okay, I kind of trust you. Okay, and your faith is kind of wobbly, and you pray a little bit and pray a little bit more, and you learn this. But we're tapping into the resources of God. And one of the resources he offers us is his peace. And think about that. Is God ever scared? Is he ever nervous? Did God a few years ago what is COVID? Michael, why didn't you tell me about this? I've never heard of this. Now it's all over and we're shutting business. What? What's happening? People are losing their jobs. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Is that God's response? Is he ever nervous? Is he ever afraid? Is he ever anxious? Ever. God is always fully at peace because he's always powerful. Always. Never lacks peace. So if the God of peace is offering to give you peace, then it's going to be peace beyond your understanding because he's never anxious or worried. And this is the offer of God. And this is what, if you read the book, and I hope you do, one of the reasons I started doing this series is because one of the words that I couldn't stop reading and paying attention to over and over again was peace, 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 peace. Talks about it all the time. Here's one of the places. It was a couple of places. He said this. When he was ready to open up one of his orphanages, I think it was going to be a 2nd or 3rd building on Wilson Street, there was a problem that was occurring, and he couldn't solve the problem. So Mueller did just what I said, right? We bring our needs to him, we pray about it, we tap into the infinite resources of God, and he works in our situation, but he also works in us. Here's what he said happened. He said, I prayed about it, and he said, and I now enjoy a peaceful state of heart concerning the subject, and was more assured than ever that God would establish the work. And then he wrote, the next day, the issue was resolved. And I want you to notice both things that happened in this. He trusted God, and God didn't just do the work that he couldn't do, but he also worked inside of George Mueller's heart so that he had peace. Don't miss this. God doesn't just want to show up in your life and bless you, but he does. He wants to bless you. He also wants to show up in your heart and fill your heart and mind with his peace while you're waiting. And if you don't have peace and you have the activity of God, you're still missing something. He wants both for you. He wants you to be able to tell stories of how God showed up and did things in your life, and he also wants you to be able to stand up and say, I experienced God in this way, in supernatural peace. That's what he wants for you. So my question is going to be this again. When you think about the problems in your life that you're really worried about, the things that are challenging and stressful for you, are you anxious today? Are you worried? Or do you have peace? Do you have peace? So what do we do in those times when we don't really have peace? There's 4 things, and they're on your notes. We're going to jump down to letter A. The first thing I'm going to challenge you to do is this. You got to name the emotion that you're feeling. And you can do this in 2 ways, and I talk about this all the time. If you come to Peniel regularly, you hear me talk about this. You can name the emotion either by talking it out with someone or by journaling it. I'm a big believer in journaling. You got to write it out. I use this all the time in my life. And I'm going to go back to Philippians 4:6 for all this. He says, don't worry about anything. Instead, pray about everything. So if you're going to pray about it, you got to identify what it is. So here's how I do this. I sit down with a chart like this. If you Google emotions chart, you'll see charts like this pop up, and you can just download them. I have printed off. They're in my prayer notebook when I'm praying. They're on my laptop and my phone. And in those times when I'm feeling anxious or scared or something like that, I often don't know what I'm feeling. So I'll literally sit down, open up a new page in my notebook, and I'll say, what am I feeling? And I'll look it over. And I may feel threatened, or I may feel frustrated. And you're going to identify every emotion that you have. And you're going to write it out or talk it out. And here's how this works. Did you know this? This is what neuroscience shows us. Some of you have seen this before. This is your brain. Put your hand like this. Put your thumb like this across there, and then fold your fingers over like that. So go ahead and just do this for a second. I'll show you how this works. So this is your brain. This is what we know from the field of neuroscience. So this part of your brain, this is your thinking centers of your brain, the rational centers of your brain. Flip that up, and this is the amygdala, the emotional centers of your brain. We always tend to think of ourselves as very rational people who occasionally feel. But the reality is, it's the opposite. We are emotional people who occasionally think. That's what we actually are. Because all input for your body travels into your brain through the emotional center before it ever reaches the rational center. And here's what we know from neuroscience. They can hook your brain up to machines right now and have you tell stories about painful things that you've been through. And when you name the emotion that you're feeling, do you know what we know in your brain? It's like the activity in the emotional center of your brain gets turned down. You literally, God wired you to feel better when you just name the emotion that you're feeling. God, I'm feeling scared today. God, I'm feeling anxious today. I'm feeling frustrated today. Have you ever told God that you're mad at him? Because it's true, some of you are, you're mad at him. And literally naming the emotion turns the dial down on it. God wants you to do that. So you're going to pray about it. You got to be honest about what you're praying about. God, here's the emotions that I'm feeling. And then, step 2, Philippians is really clear about it. Tell him what you need. So what do you need? What do you need from God? Now, I made a mistake here for a long, long time. I've done this first part, this kind of journaling for years. But about a year ago, I was reading a book, and the author said, you need to go not just beyond just naming the emotion that you're feeling, you need to tell him then what you need. How many of you have ever seen a chart like this? You ever seen anything like this before? Again, if you Google it, Google basic human needs. The author that I was reading a year ago really changed me when she talked about this, and she said, think about the basic human needs that you have, because the Bible commands us to tell him what we need. Here's what some of you have done in this series. You've started telling God what you need financially, and that's great. And you've started telling him what you need to do in your business, and that's great. And you've started telling him what you need him to do in that relationship, or how you need him to guide you. Wonderful. Have you ever thought about telling God what you need emotionally? Until a year ago, I never even had. Until I read that in that book, and it just hit me so strong. So I went online, found this is one of my charts that I use. So when I'm really hurting and struggling, I'll literally write out my emotions, and then I'll pivot, and I'll say, God, here's what I need from you right now. Have you ever felt like you need to be heard by God? Some of you, that's what you need today. You need to feel like God has heard you. Some of you, though, you need to feel like you're valuable to God. Second to the last word there, you see it? Because some of you don't feel very valuable to God. Have you ever told God what you need emotionally? Until a year ago, I never had. Super significant. Because he wants us to tell him what we need. That's what he told us to do. And you won't have the peace of God till you do. Because the first part is we tell him what he needs, then he gives us his peace. So I'm going to identify my emotions, I'm going to tell him what I need, I'm going to thank him for what he has done, because this is right what it says in Philippians to do, remember? Pray about everything, tell him what you need, thank him for what he's done. And gratitude is another superpower. God knew exactly what he was saying when he put this in the Bible, because gratitude changes your brain. I'll never forget one of the worst seasons of my life when I was more scared than practically any time in my entire life. I had so many needs, and every morning I was so scared. The only thing I could do is get up every morning and read my Bible and pray and start my day that way. Otherwise, I had no peace at all. And all I could do was a negative what if, which isn't like me, but it was during that scary time. What if this doesn't work out? What if this doesn't work out? And so one day I was sitting there and I was reading my Bible and praying, was reminded to do this. Tell him thanks for all he's done. So I opened up a new page in my journal and I started saying, God, here's what I'm grateful for in my life. And I started to think about what am I grateful for. And I filled a page, 2 columns, with all these things that God had done for me in my life that I was grateful for. I cannot even tell you how much that changed my whole life during that horrible season. Nothing in my circumstances had changed, and everything in my life had changed. Because all of a sudden my focus had shifted onto what I was grateful to God for. Have you ever done that? If you're in the middle of something really, really hard right now, one of the best things I can encourage you to do is sit down and say, what do you have to be grateful for? Make as big a list as you can. Watch the impact it has on you. But there's one more piece to this, the final piece. I have to learn how to counteract my anxious thoughts with the promises of God. Counteract my anxious thoughts with the promises of God. Any of you ever been to Lake Michigan? You ever been up to one of the Great Lakes? For years I used to go up to Door County every year. And it was so fun to sit on the shore when a storm rolled in on Lake Michigan. You could see it coming for miles. I was on the shore, so I was okay. I wasn't in a boat. So on the shore, you just get in my car and go. But you would watch these storms roll in, and you could see the thunder and lightning coming, and the wind start to pick up, and the water would start to blow. And the only thing that kept those boats safe was one thing, and you all know what it was. They had an anchor. All of them. And if they didn't have an anchor, if the anchor broke, if the anchor line broke, during a storm, what happened to those boats? They would crash into another boat, or they would be blown ashore, blown out to the lake, or they would sink. Without that anchor, they were in big, big trouble. Here's what I learned. When you're in the middle of a big storm and you're feeling anxious and worried, you have to have an anchor for your mind, and the promises of God are the anchor for your mind. It's the promises of God that anchor your mind in the middle of storms. Now, again, if you read the book, you'll see it. In the book, here's what he said. One time, toward the end, so he's building his first orphanage. He's going to have hundreds of orphans to care for. And no money. Just prayer and God. He said, sometimes all has appeared to be dark. Have you ever been there? Where everything in your life feels like it's dark right now? He said, I could have been overwhelmed with grief and despair, but at such times I was encouraged in God by faith in 3 things. And here they are. This is his trifecta. God's almighty power, his unchangeable love, and his infinite wisdom. And he said in the journal, he said, I said to myself, God is able and willing to deliver me. And then he said I would quote this verse back to myself in those times where I felt overwhelmed. And here's one of my favorite verses in the Bible, one of my favorite promises. Since he, God, did not spare even his own son, but gave him up for us all, won't he also give us everything else? And I explained this a couple of weeks ago. This is what it means. All of us, every human being is in the same boat with God. We look around at each other and we're like, well, I'm okay. If I died, I'd be all right. I'd go to heaven, because I'm a pretty good person and I've done some good things and some bad things too. But you know what? Look at that person. They're worse than me and they're worse than me. And oh my God, whoa, look at that. I'm fine. God's got a grade on the curve, so I'll be all right. We'll be all okay. And yet Jesus revealed that God is a being of perfect love. In him there is no darkness at all. Do you want to make that claim? You want to make the claim there's no darkness in you? That there's never been darkness in you, that you've only been loving your entire life? No one would believe it. We have all fallen short of him. So we have this tremendous need. We have a debt we've created with God we cannot pay. And so it is our greatest need, and so God paid it. And he paid it with the death of his only son, Jesus. That's what this is saying. He didn't even hold back his own son when we needed it, but gave his son Jesus, who died on a cross to meet our biggest need. So now here's what the verse is saying. So if in the moment of our greatest need, God gave the greatest gift, his son Jesus Christ, now when we come to him with a need that is nowhere near as great as this, does it make any sense that God would say, nah, you're on your own? I helped you enough up here. I'm not helping you anymore, right? That's what he's saying. He's saying, listen, if he would help us with this need by giving the greatest he had, don't you think it makes sense that when we have far lesser needs that he will be there to help us with those? And George Mueller wrote this promise kept my soul in peace. Do you want to know where peace comes? You need an anchor for your mind in those anxious times, and the anchor are the promises of God. What has God promised you? For Mueller, this was one of the key promises that he went back to anytime he was scared, anytime he was anxious, anytime he was afraid. I've used this my whole spiritual life without knowing and being able to articulate it like I can now. I'm using it right now. Some of you know that when I started this series 5 weeks ago, the Sunday I was to start it, that Tuesday before the Sunday I started, an email went out in our company saying, we're going to be laying off a lot of people today. And not long after I got that email, my boss's boss sent me a note saying, I need to talk to you. That was not the note you wanted to get that day. So, there's like this huge lump in your throat. I was in office that day, so I stood up and walked into her office, and she told me that I was one of the lucky 5% that day who was going to be given the permission to go find work elsewhere. Surprise! Surprise. First, I've been very honest about this. The first 24 hours were really hard. But I was literally teaching on this whole thing for 5 weeks. God has a sense of humor. So I was like, all right, well, I'm doing everything I told you. I have a need, God. I have a need. And I'm going to pray about it constantly. Because you're the one that can help me in the middle of this need. And initially, I was just praying for him to give me a different job, somewhere else to work, and ignoring what he wanted to do inside of me, like give me his peace. Just give me a job, God. You can keep the peace for yourself. So, right? And it's like, no, he wants to do both. And over a week ago, something really started to change inside of me. I started to get irritable and anxious and afraid. Fear, it's not an emotion I commonly feel. But I started to feel so scared. And the crazy thing was, you know what was making me scared? Not that my job search wasn't working. Quite the opposite. There were 5 companies that wanted to interview me, and I made it through to the second round with 4 of them, and now I've made it to the 3rd round with 1 of them, and all of a sudden, then I started to get scared. Isn't that crazy? Things are going well. Boy, I'm scared. Doesn't quite make sense, right? But I was really scared, because what was in my mind were all these negative what-ifs. What if I go to the wrong place? What if one of these companies is worse than what I've experienced before? What if it's a bad fit for me? What if? My wife will tell you, that's not normally me. But all of a sudden in that season, for that week, it was me, and I was miserable as could be. Miserable. Thank God I wasn't teaching about peace at that time, because I would have only told you about it and not actually tell you what it's like to experience it, because I had no peace. So I knew I needed an anchor for my soul. Thankfully, I read my Bible almost every single day. I've told you over and over again, when you're afraid, when you're scared, when you're struggling, always go to the biggest book in the Bible, the book of Psalms, right in the middle. Years ago, I came across this verse. Look at this. God said in Psalms, I will instruct you, and I will teach you in the way you should go, and I will counsel you with my loving eye on you. And that is in my prayer notebook. And every day when I get to that part of my prayer where I'm saying, God, I need you to guide me to the right job, I put my finger on that promise and I say, you promise that you'll guide me. You promise that you'll teach me, and I love what he says, in the way I should go. And what I love most about that verse is a little word he put toward the end, and he didn't have to say it. He said, not only will I teach you the way you should go, he said, I'll keep my loving eye on you. He could have just said he'd keep my eye on you. Right? Is that what he said? Because he loves me. He's got his eyes on me right now. And he is going to guide me, and he's going to teach me, and he's going to lead me to the right next position until I stand in front of all of you and say, you know what George Mueller said? He said, I believe our Heavenly Father never takes away anything from his children unless he means to give them something better. And someday I'll say, thank God that he took away what he did because of how much better he had for me. So, some questions as we finish this series up today. What problem or need or issue are you going to start trusting God with today? Listen, if you just want God to be just a word that you say once in a while, ignore everything I said in the series. But if you want to know God and really experience him, then you have got to start this. You've got to start with your hand out, saying to God, God, I am going to start from this day forward trusting you with what? You've got to trust him with something to experience him. And then, because he doesn't just want to help you with the issue, he wants to help inside you. You got to pay attention to peace. And when you're not feeling very peaceful, you got to ask these, you got to go back to these steps we talked about. Tell him what you need. What do you need from God? Thank him for all he's done. For some of you, that will have the greatest impact on you. If you go home and spend a little time this afternoon making a list of all the things you're grateful for, and you just keep writing until you can't think of anything else, you will be amazed at how much you write. And it'll change internally what's going on inside of you. And then the most important thing, find a promise from God to anchor your mind in that time. And if you don't know what they are, Google it. Promises of God in the Bible, there are thousands. And keep reading until you read one that strikes you, and that becomes your anchor. Let me have you bow your heads as we finish today. Many of you are willing to trust God with these needs in your life, but you have not gotten to the point yet where you trust him with the greatest need. If you are evaluating yourself based on perfect love, how close are you to perfect love? How many of you could say, I've never said an unloving thing? I've never had an unloving thought. I've never done an unloving thing. Because the standard for being with God is perfect love, because he is perfect love. And if you just look at that standard and stop comparing yourself to anyone else, but compare yourself to God, you see quickly that we all have a huge need with God, and we're in trouble. We need him. And the incredible thing is this God cares so much about us that he sent his son Jesus to die on a cross to pay our debt. Do you know that the Bible says that when Jesus died on that cross, he took into his own body my unloving words, my unloving deeds, our unloving choices, all of them. He paid in full and then rose again. And if you will let Jesus Christ do this for you, he will forgive you, put you in the family of God, and the promises of God become yours. And if this is what you want, then in your heart, tell him that. Say something like this in your heart to say today. Say, Jesus, I am so far from perfect. There's a lot in my life that I regret. But I've heard that you died on that cross for me, so please forgive me today. Please forgive me. Please come and make your home inside of me. I want to experience a new life with you today. In Jesus' name, amen. So I want to thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to watch this service online today. If you found it helpful, we always love to hear from people who are watching online. You can send us an email through the church website. If you go to penielchurchlife.com, in the upper right-hand corner is a box that says, I said yes to Jesus, or I have a prayer request. If you click in that, you can communicate with us as a church. So if you do have something you want us to pray about, put it in there and send it to us, and we'll pray for you as a church. Or if you prayed the prayer at the end of the service and you want to let us know about that, give us your name and address, and we'll send you some material in the mail as a follow-up, as a way to encourage you in the next steps to grow spiritually. But again, thanks so much for taking the time to watch this service today, and we hope that God's great blessing rests on you.